Hello, hello, hello. How is everybody today? Happy Thursday and all that jazz. People are just coming in now. Hello from the Pivot Series. This is number 7, I think. I am Radine O'Connor. I am the Community Manager at RDI Hub in Killorglin. Hello, Jacqueline. Say hi from wherever you are. Darrell, if you want to come on at any stage and say hi and make sure that everybody can see you. Anastasia, lovely to see you again. It's lovely to see a couple of people. Hello, Darrell. Do you want to say hello and make sure everyone can hear you?
Hi, everybody. Looking forward to talking to you.
Super stuff. Hiya, Lena. How you doing? Yeah, lovely to see some faces returning. Welcome, welcome. For those of you who are new to the Pivot Series, so this is your opportunity to connect with thought leaders, exploring how you pivot, reinvent, and innovate your business to survive and thrive in these difficult times. It's powered by RDI Hub, which is an environment for startups and corporates to learn and collaborate together to accelerate growth. We currently have spaces available for startups and corporates in the tech field looking for a safe space for their teams. So if you need top tech tools, a fantastic network of mentors to get to where you need to go fast, and you can do it alone, along with wellness programs, innovation programs, get in contact with me. I will put a little my email in the chat function here and reach out. So thank you all for taking your time today. I know there's still people coming in, that's okay. It's 2 minutes past, so we'll just kick off. Darrell is here today to talk to you about the post-pandemic rules of innovation. Who will be the winners and the losers, and what the next 3 to 5 years will look like, where are the opportunities. We will have time for Q&As at the end. I have a hard stop, so I will get the full Q&As this time. I'm endeavouring to do that. Darrell will be joining us in RDI Hub on the 15th of September, so if you enjoy the session and you have a challenge statement, reach out to me and say, look, I'm interested, and we will organise something in RDI Hub. Darrell has also kindly offered to give away a couple of free books to whoever has the best questions. And I might pick someone from the audience and let them decide who gets the books. I'm saying it now, you can't vote for yourself. We'll see how that works out. So, as always, at the start of these sessions, I'd like to get a sense of how everybody in the room is and where your mind is at, and just ask your opinion on stuff, because this is your session. So one of the questions I suppose myself and Darrell chatted about was the barriers to innovation, on what they are, you know, and how do you overcome them. Not easy always, but so those barriers are different for everyone, right? So we just have a really quick Menti question. So Menti, for those who have not been with us before, is the tool we use. So you take out your phone and you go to www.menti.com and you use the code 112195. And then there's a question, and the question's simple. So what are the barriers to innovation for you specifically? You get 3 answers and you can answer whatever way you see fit. So take a minute, pull out the phone, and what will happen here is a word cloud will appear, and it will give you a good sense of everyone else's thoughts on the call, which is a really nice thing, because you get to have some level of collaboration even though we are all apart. Okay, some really interesting ones coming in. Training is, yeah, I think innovation and training, right, it's one of those things that will come up time and time again, that innovation, everyone thinks about the big idea, but the big idea innovation is just one tiny part of it. It's all the execution, all the rest of it, and you need training to understand that. Stakeholder engagement, 100%. We've all been there, pulling stakeholders with us as as we try and get something over the line. Credibility, team dynamic. Yeah, and I think that's not exclusive to innovation, but yeah, you definitely have to have a really good, well-gelled team to deliver what you need to. Mindset's always going to be one. Fear. Funding. Yeah, funding. I'm sure you've seen a couple of these before. Darrell, is there anything here that you are finding unusual, or that you think is there anything missing?
It's unusual to see training so visible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, time's almost always there. And I'm not sure where the fear is coming from it, whether that's fear of entering the unknown or whether it's the world around us, or maybe the combination of the two. Yeah,
organizational culture is always going to be in there, I think. Money and time. Okay, I think everybody has, we're still going. So buy-in, buy-in is inspiration, credibility, process, status quo. Some really good ones in there. I'm going to take a little screenshot of this now and share it with you in the follow-up, just so you know, like everyone is obviously having similar experience around fear, time, and funding. Okay, I am now. Thank you for that, guys. That was really useful. Courage. Courage is a really interesting one. Okay, so thank you for getting involved there. For those of you who don't know Darrell, I had the opportunity earlier this year to see Darrell in action when he did some workshops with us in RDI on band. You're in for a treat. Darrell is, like I said, inventor, author of how many books, Darrell?
I think we're on 12 now.
I just don't know what I'm doing with my time. These sessions are great, but I'm questioning my life choices. So yeah, author, inventor, CEO and technical director of systematic innovation. What am I missing, Darrell?
Oh, that's probably enough, isn't it? I guess my part-time academic as well.
So part-time academic,
yes.
Because you have, really good use of time. So you're in for a treat. Like I said, he will talk you through the new world of innovation rules. So before I waste any more time, I'm going to hand you over to Darrell. You have the reins there, Darrell, and I'll jump off.
Okay, well, Radine, thanks very much for the introduction and for the opportunity. It's always lovely working with RDI Hub. So I shall go through the presentation, and probably easiest in this format to keep the answers to the end. I'll try and keep my eye on the chat box and see what's coming in. But I'll be succinct and give us plenty of time to ask and answer those questions. So I think we're all aware that we're in a new world right now, and I think I'm hearing a lot of words that say it's not going to go back to the old world. So we're really in it, and I would tend to agree with that. So the basic structure of the presentation is I thought I'd get the bad news part of the story out of the way first, and then we can focus on the exciting and the good news side of what's this new world going to bring for us. Let's think about the last 10 years. So this model here comes from some work in the US originally on generation cycles, and up in the top right-hand corner, that's a book that we put out, 11 years ago now, which basically says that this period that we're in right now, so the period from 2020 to 2025, is a crisis period, and it's something that the model has been predicting for a long time. The fourth turning book from which this stuff originated came out in 1995, and pretty much everything that's happened in the world since 1995 is consistent with this basic model. The model itself is based on generation cycles. So what you can see there, each of those diagonal bands represents a generation. And so the green band, if you look at the dates across the bottom there, so people born from 1962, 63 to 1982, 83. So across the bottom is the calendar year. Vertical axis is then age of a person. So that green band is typically what's known as Generation X. The yellow band next to it is Generation Y. and then the kids that are born, so Generation Z, so born from 2001 to the present day and probably till about 2025, is the grey band, and known as a suffocated generation, also an artist generation. If you've looking at these diagonal bands, one of the key features of it, according to the books, is the idea of a repeating pattern. And so the yellow band, the Generation Y, is a hero generation. If you go back 4 generations, then you see an equivalent to that generation. And so this crisis period we're in right now is essentially the next in the cycle of many crisis cycles. The crisis period is about 80 to 100 years. And so any descriptions that you hear in the media of, oh, it's like the 30s, then that's this pattern reproducing itself. When I first saw this model in the late 1990s, I absolutely hated it. As an aerospace engineer originally, it's a really good idea to challenge everything. And this is one of those things that we really did try and challenge. And we've spent the last 20 years failing to disprove the model. And so it becomes a big part of what we do these days. So what it's really predicated on is understand the world at first principles level. You can't predict random events, but what you can predict are society's reaction to those events. So what the original books talked about is somewhere between 2000 and 2005, there will be an event that will change the mood of society and trigger the crisis period. I think we now know that that was 9/11 in the US. And next up, over the period 2020 to 2025, the crisis period comes to a head. And so after 2025, somewhere around about that point in time, then things will settle down again. So it's not an unexpected thing as far as the model is concerned. We've been trying to tell our clients about it for the last 10 years. Not many have wanted to listen, honestly, because I think it's an aversion sometimes to listening to bad news. My view is that there's always an opportunity inside any crisis period. There are always winners inside crisis. I think if anybody's thinking that the COVID pandemic is the end of the crisis, then let's get one more bit of bad news out of the way. I don't think it is. Certainly if you live in the UK, this cartoon's been doing the rounds quite a lot recently. What we've got is several waves of things all happening at the same time. The trendy neighbour talks about dominoes and lots of dominoes wobbling, and unfortunately it only takes one domino to fall over for it to start knocking several other dominoes. And so I think the pandemic is the first domino that's fallen over, and we're still looking for and anticipating what are the other dominoes that are going to fall over. That's again not really particularly good news for most people. One group of people for whom it is good news, I would say, is that if you're in the innovation world, then this is absolutely your time in history. So if you think about not just generation cycles, but also the idea of cycles through evolutionary time, biologists will talk about punctuated equilibrium. So for large periods in history, you get very stable conditions, not much changes. And then periodically, you'll get a revolutionary set of changes. So one change in some biological system will trigger a whole bunch of other evolutionary changes in other ones. In context of mankind and our evolution, then these revolutionary periods, according to the generation model, are about every 80 to 100 years. But they are the period when an awful lot of innovation happens. And so it is, I say, the time for the innovator relative to all those people that have been doing operational excellence and looking after those kind of important duties. In a time of big change, optimizing is no longer the right strategy for most organizations. I think what we've seen with things like just-in-time supply chains, the pandemic has shown how they might be efficient, but they're not very effective when it comes to a different world. So first category of winners in difficult times are, say, the innovators. In many reasons, it's one of the reasons why we've got the business that we have, anticipating this stuff. That said, the innovation job is pretty difficult. So there's been a lot of activity in recent years with lots and lots of methodologies. So design thinking, for example, Agile, Scrum, very popular things. Lean, Six Sigma in the operational excellence world purportedly help us with the innovation job. Unfortunately, when you look at the success rate of applying those tools and those methods, then they don't really do an awful lot. 98% of all innovation attempts end in failure, based on 11 million case studies so far. When you zoom in and look at case studies that have been inspired by design thinking, for example, or Blue Ocean strategy, then it has no impact on the failure rate at all. So what we set about doing with the latest project, anticipating this crisis period and lots of innovation, it's a great time for startup companies. So let's get a recipe book, if you like, for startup companies that gets beyond the methodology way of looking at the world and says, actually, if we dig in and look at what did the 2% do when they were innovating, doing that job successfully, what was the DNA that lay behind their successes? And so the book is an attempt to read between the lines and look at what is it that determines success. So I think when we talk about new world or new rules of innovation in that new world, I think actually the rules of innovation haven't changed. The context has, but the rules haven't. The problem for most organizations is we don't know what the rules are. And this is an attempt to put those rules together for the first time into the book. So just thinking about patterns and rules, one of the things that we know from disasters, so if you think about crises from a humanitarian perspective, aftermath of monsoons, for example, tsunamis, then if you talk to people that work in those domains, they'll talk about this disaster cycle here, which has got a number of phases to it. So there's a pre-disaster period, the period when the impact happens. So if you think about the pandemic, for example, the pandemic arrives, then you get this beautiful heroic period where everybody has to pull together just to get through the initial stages. So if you look at what the world had to do when the pandemic, when it first became apparent that this is not going to go away, this is going to be serious, shortage of PPE, so people running around doing whatever was necessary to find equipment and ventilators and et cetera, then that's a well-established phase in how these things work. Then you hit a honeymoon period, which is where we have pulled together, we've kind of got past the worst of things, and enter a disillusionment phase, which is where we realize that all of the expedient solutions that we put together, so in the UK, for example, pictures of clinicians and healthcare workers wearing bin bags as PPE equipment, for example, in the aftermath of the honeymoon period, then there's a realization that actually this is not a great solution to the problem. It's we need to find better ways of doing things. So think about this from the innovator's context. What we see in the honeymoon period is what I would call expedient invention. There's an immediate need, and so we'll just look at the resources what are around us, and we'll pull together whatever we can that will meet that need as best we can. So the real innovation opportunity is the phase that's coming up in the next 3-6 months, the disillusionment phase, because that's when actual innovation takes place. And right at the heart of that innovation story is solving contradictions. So for the most part, what organizations do, what we've all been taught to do, is live life by making trade-offs and compromises. And when you go and study lots of people doing the innovation job, what you see very clearly from them is they did not accept trade-offs. So going to look for contradictions is a core part of the innovation success story, certainly the beginning part of that. And coming up later on this year is where that phase is typically going to come into its own. The duration of it, I think, well, we'll perhaps talk about that in a few minutes, but according to Oz, it's probably going to be three, 4, 5 years before things settle down again properly. The idea behind the book, so the one that's just come out, really for startups. For people that are inside organizations, then what we've done a few years ago, 2012, we put out the Innovation Capability Model book. The idea of those books is let's learn from those that have been there before us and done some hard work for us and understand how the world works. What we've got inside those, and particularly the one on the right-hand side, the one that's just come out, is let's try and understand the world at first principle level. It's standing on the shoulder of giants, and one of those giants who occasionally gets things right is Bill Gates. And one of my favourite quotes from Bill Gates is this one here. So most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10. Humans, I think, naturally think of the world changing in a linear fashion, and for most of life, that is the case. Relatively calm periods. In revolutionary periods, it absolutely is not the case, and so those linear assumptions that we've all got about the world, unfortunately, don't work. What I think Bill Gates was talking about is, if you get right down to first principles, the idea of the fundamentals of how systems evolve. So if you think about anything about your business or your idea for a business that you're trying to improve, so we'd like to make the world more sustainable, for example, do something in the sustainability domain. I'd like to grow my business. I'd like to become profitable. If you think about all those things that you'd like to improve, and you think about how that journey is going to progress as a function of time, then typically what you'll see is this S-shaped pattern here, where there's an initial period of struggle when it's very difficult to improve and get to where you'd like to get to. But then at some point, everything clicks and everything seems to come together, and we hit our stride and we get into a nice steep part of the curve. And then, unfortunately, a law of diminishing returns kicks in and says, no matter what it is you're trying to do, something's going to come along and stop you. So prior to the pandemic, I think there were an awful lot of industries had optimized themselves to the top of these curves here. So an awful lot of stuck organizations that have been doing Lean on Six Sigma, for example, for a number of years. And others that hit that law of diminishing returns, so getting increasingly frustrated. So just in time, for example, is a classic example of being stuck at the top of one of these curves. So innovation then is really all about making a jump to a new curve. And I think one of the things that companies find difficult in normal times is, if you think about this picture and the next S curve, the start of the next S curve is almost always lower than where you were on the top of the previous S curve. And that's why prior to the pandemic, I think a lot of larger organizations have been very reluctant to innovate because nobody in operational excellence world likes it when things get worse. One of the lovely things about crisis periods is that everything's got worse. And so it's much easier to justify a decision to jump to another way of doing things. So when we start looking at patterns of these jumps, then one of the places we can find a very good pattern, I think, is in the world of literature and film these days. So if you think about pretty much any movie that you like, particularly if it's a Hollywood movie, then almost inevitably these days, if you think about the script of that movie, it's been written with a very clear formula behind it, and that formula all comes from this guy here. So when I talk about standing on the shoulder of giants, here's one of those giants. Joseph Campbell devoted his life to studying literature and what makes a successful book or film versus the enormous percentage that get pulped. And he identified this hero's journey as we now know it, which looks something like this. So if you think about any kind of book or movie, it typically starts at the 9 o'clock position on this circle here. So we get a few scenes which describe the ordinary world. In order to keep us interested, there's a call to adventure. The hero usually refuses that call. So call to adventure, let's set up our own business. Or inside organisations, we've missed our quarterly figures, or in the UK's economy's case, we've just lost 20% of the GDP. And that call is usually refused. Yeah, it'll be okay next quarter. Everything will come back. It'll be fine. And we don't have to do anything. Then usually in a movie is the Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of moment where the mentor arrives and says to the hero, actually, it's okay, you need to go on this journey. You can't refuse this call. And then we cross the threshold and enter a special world. So a special world where none of the normal rules apply. And that's typically where half the movie takes us. So the tests, allies and enemies, that's where all the car chase and all the exciting stuff happens. And out of all that stuff, we approach the inmost cave, and then the ordeal, that's the David meets Goliath kind of moment where, by all rights, we've got no chance of being successful. In my terms, that's the contradiction moment. We've got to run towards the barriers, the things that are preventing us from getting where we want to be, hence the barriers question at the start on the Minty earlier. The hero, of course, prevails. That's one of the reasons why we go and watch movies and read books, to work out how the hero did it. But the hero's then got to get back into the real world. So a lot of startup companies that we see, they solve that ordeal, they come up with a solution, the reward, failing to realize that that's not the end of the story. If you're going to run your startup, you need to follow the road back. And it's only when you're almost back at the 9 o'clock position with the elixir that you can say that I've successfully built my startup organization. I don't think Joseph Campbell understood things at first principle level in the way that Bill Gates did, but if you take the S-curve idea and this Joseph Campbell model and overlay the two, then they fit absolutely beautiful. So the special world, all that stuff that happens on the right-hand side of Joseph Campbell's model is the stuff that happens in that gap between the two S-curves. So when we jump off the old S-curve, I'm going to set up my own business, or we're going to do things differently around here now. That crossing the threshold moment, that's the moment where we jump off our current S-curve and decide, right, we're going to find our way to the new solution. So the architecture of the book is really built around that journey. The hero's journey as far as the startup starts with that ordinary world. We go through the special world and hopefully come out the other side with a successful business. One of the things that we could see when we're looking at thousands and thousands of organizations, we've been very privileged over the years working with a number of government agencies to help them to foster startup organizations. We've seen these ordeals and the variety of ordeals that startups face, and fortunately there aren't that many of them, and so it's possible to I create a recipe book that says, okay, well, if you encounter this ordeal, then these are the sort of things that you should do because this is where other people have done to solve their ordeal. It's really all about taking a lot of the risk out of the startup process, understanding what works, understanding what doesn't work, and it's never going to be a recipe book because we're dealing with complexity, of course, but as much as possible, knowing what the key steps in the journey are going to look like and what's going to be ahead of us. Just relating that to society, exactly the same idea applies at the societal level. And so society basically every 800 years goes through these S-curve shifts. So on the right-hand side of this picture, you might be able to see that COVID-19, January to March 2020. That was basically the world pushing us all off the top of our S-curve. So it doesn't matter whether you're a startup or you're in an established business, we've all been pushed off the curve. And we've been thrown across the threshold, many of us without the mentor there being to guide them into help them to understand what to do next. If you go back one cycle, then the pandemic is basically the equivalent, in Europe at least, of Germany invading Poland, or if you're in the US, it's Pearl Harbor. That's the moment where we realise that actually we have crossed the threshold and we are in a special world now. We're at war now in the case of the last cycle, so we've got tests, allies, enemies, innermost cave, the ordeal still to come. And yeah, I say my prediction from earlier, certainly the model we're looking at is, this period is 2020, 24, 25 before things stabilize again. I think the good news for everybody that sits behind that is that anybody that makes it to 2024, 25, particularly startups that have grown through that period, they then enter a very stable period in history. So they're pretty well good for the next 40, 50 years. So it's, I think a lot of organizations begin to realize that now is not the time for making money. It's making enough money to survive, but recognize that once you have survived, that's when the big prizes come. And I think a lot of the Silicon Valley companies are basically betting on exactly that phenomenon happening. So let's just think about this special world a little bit, and particularly the ordeal. And again, my barriers question from earlier, it is that we've left the current system and we're on our way to the other one. So this trapeze idea is probably a useful metaphor, certainly for myself. One of the reasons I'm quite comfortable in that kind of world is because I know we've built tools to get us there. And we've built mindsets to get us there. And so, in the ordinary world, I think if you look at what goes on inside organizations, there are rules, there's a clear direction, everything's measurable, everything's controllable. And the world we've all been thrown into is pretty much the opposite of all of that. And I think the innovator, the innovator's mindset, at least, is very comfortable on the right-hand side of this picture. But if you look at society at large, then the ratio of people comfortable on the left-hand side or the right-hand side right now is about 94%, 6%. Which suggests that there are an awful lot of people now feeling quite uncomfortable in the world. We hear the word anxiety an awful lot, and I think a lot of that anxiety is a dawning recognition that all those things that we've been taught aren't the sort of things that are going to be useful to us in the next 3-4 years. And so I think that the innovator, and certainly the startup hero's journey, is getting ourselves to a position where we are comfortable with the stuff on the right hand side. It's okay to be confused, it's okay to not know the answer. I think innovators are very comfortable recognizing that it could be months before I find the answer here. I've got to try stuff, I've got to iterate as quickly as I can in order to learn what it is that the market wants right now, spend as little money as possible to learn as much as possible, such that I can make progress and unlock the formula that allows me later on to scale up and monetize what it is that I've learned. From a methodology perspective, I'm not going to dwell on the big outputs of our research over the last 20 years. It's all called a contradiction matrix. So the reason we ask companies to run towards the barrier is this tool tells me that whatever those barriers are, somebody out there has already solved them. And so when I talk about 11 million case studies, this is the database where we put all those case studies. The way this thing works, probably the only words you can read there up in the top left-hand corner, what are you trying to improve, what gets worse, so where are you trying to get to, what are the barriers, and if you can identify those two things, then find the right row in the right column. What you find in each of those boxes is, okay, well, these are the strategies then that other people have successfully used to solve those kind of problems. I'm not going to dwell on that, but what I will say is that if you look at the startup journey, and if you look at those 2% of organizations that have prevailed, then the book talks about a 6 C's model, and the first 2 of those C's are contradiction and compass. So compass is make sure you've got a clear understanding of where you're heading. So there's much that we can't know about markets and where they're going, but there are also things that are very clear about where markets are going. Customers want more benefits, less cost, less harm, and everything's got to be consistent with that fundamental direction. So if we understand that direction, we point ourselves in that compass direction, and we start thinking about solving contradictions as a mechanism for making progress in the right direction, then solution-wise, for our business, where there's nothing better we can do, it's those 2 things are the key to getting the right answer. The third C then is generating a comfort with complexity. So understand the context that we're in. We are all in a complex world right now, and understanding the rules of behavior in complex world. Try stuff, learn faster than other people, being the core of that. Then that's where success starts to come from. Fourth C, building around those three, are innovation is not a solo activity. Invention is. So it's perfectly possible to generate great ideas by yourself, but successfully monetizing those ideas requires a number of people around you. So there's a certain set of rules in terms of the types of people that you need around you, the skills that you need around you. And it's about, very often, how do I harness those people? Very often in a situation where the contradiction is I've got no money to do that. How do I get people doing stuff for me in a way that allows me to tap into what they've got, but not necessarily have to give them lots of money for the privilege of doing that? Can I find win-win situations where everybody comes out of the situation better than they were before? And I think just pointing to where we're going to conclude shortly, what we also know about crisis periods is community is really, really important. So geographic community, certainly the pandemic situation, but more globally, just finding a community of like-minded people is essential in that innovation journey. C number 5 then is a really tough one. This comes from some work done with small organizations in Germany, actually, and that research basically distilled success down to 2 things. One was know-how, and in my terms, know-how is basically the first 4 C's, and the other thing from the German study was charisma. So if you look at the characteristics of the individuals in a startup business, then there's definitely an element of charisma that goes with them. Now, as soon as I saw that in the German research, I knew I was in trouble, because I'm just not that charismatic person. So what do you do when you are in that situation? I can do the other 4 things. I can't do the charisma. Well, fortunately, I started my career at Rolls-Royce, and I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back on the success of Rolls-Royce as a business, going right back to the early days of the company, I think the success of the business relative to all the 130 car companies around at the same time as Rolls-Royce started, what made them successful is they had 2 people who had Rolls and had Royce, and Henry Royce was the know-how guy, and Charles Rolls was the charisma guy. So they couldn't find one individual with everything, but they could find 2 individuals that satisfied this German found critical mass of skills. So 5th C is the charisma thing, the X factor part of the story, and then the final one is all the between stuff, which I call calibration in the book. It's all about knowing what to measure. If it's all about learning and feedback loops, so trying something, learning from what happened to know what to do next, then it's measuring the right things that enables you to create those loops and to make sure that when you do iterate your solutions, that you are moving in the right directions. So those are 6 C's, and I'll say that the book is there's a chapter on each of those C's to flesh out those things. What does it mean in the context of a startup business? How do I build my community? How do I work out what to measure, etc. And I thought I'd just pick out one in a little bit more detail, just to use perhaps the final thing to talk about before we open up for questions. Just about complexity, and I think we all now recognise we are in a different world, our so-called new world. This model here is a little bit complicated, but I think it's an important part of the calibration story, actually, as well as the complexity story, making sure we know where we are. So what this picture is all about is there's 4 different kinds of situation you could find yourself in. If I go horizontally across the bottom, you can be in a nice simple world, you can be in a complicated world, a complex world, or a chaotic world. And if you think about your system, the vertical axis, that can also be simple, complicated, complex, or chaotic. And so one of the areas you definitely don't want to be is chaos in your system. So that disintegration line at the bottom there says it's definitely a good idea to be above that line if you can. Ideal place to be is right at the top, is what I've called the anti-fragile line. So if some of you may be familiar with Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, which is a situation where any stress on the business or any stress on the individual serves to make that business or that individual stronger. That really is the place to be. Also a good place to be is that diagonal line, the Ashby line, is above that line. Because above that line basically means the capability of your system is greater than that of the environment in which you find yourself. So knowing where you're on the picture determines the sort of strategies you'll be thinking about. The challenge, I think, for a lot of organizations is most businesses have been built to operate in that triangle there. And in good times, it's definitely a good place to be. It's very efficient, being that you just simplify everything, you standardize everything, such that you can train people quickly and they can be efficient very quickly. And customers understand you very clearly and understand what you're offering is very clearly. Life is great. It's classic Henry Ford, any color you like, as long as it's black kind of world, where you literally just strip away complexity just to keep everybody's life simple. I think what Nassim Taleb is trying to tell people is that actually a really good place to be is up there. Build systems, build your business such that it's able to cope with the complexity of the world. So what I call the golden triangle, certainly as a business, that's where we try and be. You build processes that are consistent with complexity and complex systems. The hero's journey for a startup business basically looks something like that. You start off in this ordinary world, and we cross the threshold, which basically means you're now in a complex world. At some point, you are going to be in that bottom right-hand corner, living in chaos. It is part of the process, actually. And I think once I acknowledged and accepted that, a lot of the anxiety disappears. It's just the way things are, and you'll get through it. And the reason you'll get through it is because everybody else that's been there has also got through it. And you don't have to reinvent any wheels. You just need to tap into the ways that they've been able to do it. So final couple of slides. Let's just get a bit more specific in terms of winners. So there are always winners in a crisis, and left-hand side of this picture, there are winners, I think, that we can see in pretty much any kind of crisis period. So human beings need food, and so civilization lasts for about 4 square meals as the aphorism goes. That food has got to be there, and essentials of water, the shelter, etc. I mentioned already local community, that needs to be there. I think anything that's that encourages us to work as a community. I live in a village that's got about 200 people in it, and it's amazing how people have come together. Shopping for neighbours that are shielding, for example. It's really heartwarming, and I think a lot of that stuff needs to continue. Low-cost alternatives. So there are certain necessities in life and in business, and if companies can find a cheaper way of doing those things, then they're very welcome. I know a lot of my Indian friends in the IT service sector, for example, are anticipating that a lot of those low-cost alternative options head their way. So if you think about healthcare, for example, and radiologists, there's no reason at all why you couldn't have a radiologist in India analysing X-rays much more cheaply and as effectively as a local radiologist doing the job. So I think there are lots of opportunities in, say, reducing costs for people. Security always wins. perhaps a strange one, but little luxuries. Humans being what they are, we all like to treat ourselves occasionally. And the only thing that changes over time is how big are those treats. So in difficult times, a treat is going to be an ice cream, for example, or it's going to be some special chocolates or a special bottle of wine. In good times, it might be a new guitar or a new car. Big purchases tend not to happen in crisis times, but little luxuries definitely will happen still. And well, banks at the bottom there, so the finance industry always tends to come out of these things pretty well. One or two will tend to fail, but if you've got the money, you tend to win. Right hand side, finally, just very quickly, I think AI is one of those ways of achieving the low-cost alternatives. I think artificial intelligence has been on the verge for quite a while now, and I think the pandemic becomes a trigger for it. I've put low end there because I think there's a lot of over-ambition, I should say, in the world. So lots of talk of autonomous vehicles. That just ain't going to happen. That industry just hasn't even started to think about the difficult problems yet. It's sort of an easy stuff, but some of the simpler things, that a lot of white collar jobs, for example, are amenable, I would say, to an AI solution. The education sector is very likely to be disrupted. We've been working in the US, and I think it's almost inevitable there. Healthcare also, I think. Local finance, local tourism. Some of you may have seen Airbnb CEO the other day talking about how their business has changed already. But one thing that's very clearly happened, or two things actually. One is more people signing up to be hosts, and the other, more people signing up for longer visits. So I think people are very reluctant to travel long distances these days. In some cases, just not able to travel long distances, but local definitely is good. Older consumers, I think the statistics on who's got the money in society, it's the baby boomers. And so it's really fashionable designing stuff for older people, but with an aging population in most parts of the world, then it's a really good market. They are the ones with the money. Sustainability, we've seen evidence from quite a few of the venture capital companies, private equity companies, saying that the 1%, increasingly hated by the rest of the population, I think. How do they redeem themselves? Answer by investing in things which are sustainable. And I think this could become, I think, the moment when sustainability innovation gets its opportunity. And finally, meaning. People like to do meaningful stuff, and I think, I don't know about your life personally, but for me, I know the lockdown has just meant an awful lot of trivial stuff in my life has disappeared right now, and just an opportunity to focus on what is important in life. So anything that gets rid of that meaningless stuff in life and allows us to focus on meaning is very welcome. So I've talked for a long time. I'll say thank you. There's my email address if anybody wants to get in touch, my Twitter handle. And Radine, is that okay for question time now?
All good for question time. I am currently being inundated, so I will go straight to everybody in the audience. Niamh, I'm going to ask you to come up first and ask your question, because I think it's a question that a lot of people will have. Let me know if you're happy to talk and ask your question. And if not, also feel free to reject that, and I can ask the question myself here, up to yourself. So Niamh, unmute you, I suppose, if I could unmute you. Yep, okay. Well, Niamh's question is, I would be interested in hearing suggestions on how to excite the organization to grab new opportunities and get behind a strategy. So how do you sell that and get the buy-in? Mm-hmm. That is, I think so many people have issues with that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the mistake I usually see in organizations is trying to get everybody to buy in. And I think there's rarely a situation where everybody's going to buy in. I think what the innovator quickly learns to understand is is find the champions and find those people that are there and want to be on the journey with you. And a lot of organizations I work with talk about Pirates Cove when it comes to innovators, which is, we'll do a lot of stuff under the radar, we'll do a lot of stuff in secret, such that you don't need to get buy-in from everybody. Because I think a lot of people with an operational excellence mindset, they see a half-baked solution and they're immediately trying to kill it. Whereas I think that those with the innovation mindset recognize that, it is a half-baked solution right now. It's the seeds in there, and our job is to stay under the radar for as long as we can in order to only present to the world when we've got something which is 3/4 baked or 90% baked. Now, Steve Jobs was fantastic at that with Apple. They called it promise point. Don't show what you're doing to people until it's reached a situation where you've answered an awful lot of the concerns that people are going to have.
Okay. I hope that answered your question. I'm going to take another question, this time from Aaron Collins. Again, Aaron, feel free to reject if you do not want to come on, and I can read your question from here if you'd like. Hey, Aaron.
Oh, hi. How you doing, guys?
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talk so far. Well done.
Thanks,
man.
Man.
I was just wondering there, at the very outset, you were saying about design thinking and Agile and Scrum and that. Which one, or which set of toolkits would be most likely to adapt to the new type of innovation that's needed?
I think that when I talk about contradiction, the methodology that centers around and focuses on contradiction solving is TRIZ. And so I think that's going to be an inevitable place that companies have to play. Innovation is about contradiction solving. If not TRIZ, then theory of constraints also recognizes the importance of contradiction. That's another place to play. I think once you've got the contradiction piece in the jigsaw, that's what actually brings Agile and Scrum alive. Because what I see with a lot of Agile programs is organizations very quickly find themselves going in circles. And unless you've got the contradiction solving element, that's the thing that breaks you out of the going around in circles bit, and the circle becomes a spiral. And it's the same with design thinking. Actually, I think design thinking is great. It acknowledges the complexity of the world, but it doesn't acknowledge the contradiction solving part. So once you bring the contradiction solving part in, then some of the magic that's supposed to be there in design thinking actually then starts to be realized.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great question. Michael, you're up next. If you're interested in coming up to talk.
Great, thanks. Great talk, Darren.
Thanks, Michael.
Really enjoyed it. My question was about the challenge of bringing innovation into government and public institutions. So you may have a great idea or vision, but it really requires buy-in to maybe entities that maybe seem a bit more rigid in structure and maybe not as quick to move on innovation. How do you address those types of challenges?
Yeah, for a long while we'd stayed away from the public sector completely, just because it is so difficult. And what I think gets right to the heart of the difficulty is, in a lot of public sector bodies, failure is just not acceptable. And unfortunately, failure is an inevitable part of the innovation story. I think innovators have learned to relabel failure as learning, and I think the public sector is beginning to get that message now. But you see, one of the beauties of the crisis period is that everybody increasingly is aware that the current rules don't apply. And so, whereas I think a lot in the public sector body will say, well, here are the rules. The moment everybody realizes, well, those rules just don't make any sense anymore, it opens up permission for people to try new stuff. And I think that's what we're starting to see. And love him or loathe him, in the UK, Dominic Cummings, I think he understands that idea. The crisis period is awareness that the current rules don't work. It's okay to try new stuff. It's still a difficult one, but I think where I'll go to next is that don't feel you're going to get everybody bought into your innovation projects at the beginning. I think it's a case of trying stuff. And if you, there's a great book, one of my favorite books that I've referenced several times in my latest one is Radical Help by Hilary Cotton. So she's done a lot of work in the public sector, where she's designed beautiful experiments that let's say, let's find a community where we can try this and demonstrate that it works before we start to go to the mainstream politicians and convince them. It's as close to a recipe book, I would say, for the public sector as I've seen, but it's got a lot of design thinking in there. It understands the idea of contradiction solving, but it also understands this idea of use your resources. Don't take on battles that you can't win. If you've got limited resources, then fight a battle that's commensurate with those resources. I think you're still mute reading.
Sorry, here I was talking to myself. Claire, I just, McBride had a really interesting question as well. I just asked her to come on if she is interested.
Thanks, Radine. Thanks, Darrell.
Okay.
Just a question in relation to organisations that have possibly innovated more in the last 3 months than in the previous 3 years, and at the risk of beginning to get a little bit fatigued, how do we keep that going?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm working with a company in Australia at the moment, and they've got 4 new products that have developed in the last 3 months. It's an amazing surge of creativity. I think it becomes this idea of closing the loop and identifying which of those things are going to win, because in a complex environment you can't know what's going to win, and so it's a case of backing as many horses as you can for as long as you can, spending as little money as possible to learn as much as you can. I think actually what happens is the focus of that energy needs to shift. So I think what I've seen with my Australian friends is that the energy has been on, okay, let's try a new product in this domain here, let's try a new product in this domain here. So we've got loads of ideas for products. The shift now needs to be, okay, how do we scale up this product? How do we convince this particular customer about this product? So it's the same level of energy and the same level of creativity, but now focused further through the hero's journey. Actually, it's the execution stuff where the creativity's needed. But I think it's what I see with them, and I think what's crucial to all this, people are natural problem solvers, and once they've been let off the leash, I think in many ways they don't want to get back on it, back on a leash again. But as you're suggesting, it's also quite tiring for people, and so I think I tend to go with a change is as good as the rest kind of situation. It's the focus that needs to change as a project progresses.
Okay, thank you. Brilliant.
Claire, I hope that answered your question, guys. I'm conscious of time. We have some books to give away. Now, I plan to turn this over to the audience and let you guys decide, but actually I'm going to make a snap decision because we're caught on time. I thought Niamh's question and Michael's question was really, really strong. And Darrell, are you happy for each of those to get a book?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, what I'll do is I'll send you a download code, and then they can take it to the shop and get what they need.
Super. And I have a couple of questions that we haven't got to. I might share them with you, Darrell, and if you get a chance just to maybe give some short answers, and I can share them back with individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll make the slides available, and
slides available.
Yeah,
that's great. Perfect. So like I said, Darrell will be over in September. So if anyone's interested in doing a workshop, let me know. My email is in the chat function. I just want to take 2 minutes to say thank you to everybody today. We had loads of questions. As always, we will get back to your questions. And again, thank you to Darrell for taking the time out and joining us and sharing his knowledge. I always find that I learned so much. And I think you could do a whole session on the generation modeling and the fact that we had seen all this coming, right? Next week, I just want to let you know that we are having a session on change management and the psychology of change management. This is a time where we're all struggling, and like Darrell mentioned, like the anxiety is part and parcel, that uncertainty is part and parcel of our day. So we'll be joined by Steve Fleming, who's the founder and CEO of Voxify, but also Jennifer Dowling, who is an organizational psychologist, and they're going to talk about the psychology of dealing with, or with change, that change cycle, and some practical tips for organizations to ensure that they can support their teams through this transition. So I will just drop a link to that in the chat function. And if anybody is interested in getting in touch around a workshop with Darrell in September, like I said, please let me know. Guys, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks,
As
Eddie.
always, you were a pleasure to spend time with. And I will send in those links now. Okay, guys, thank you very much. And again, Darrell, thank you very much. And I will see you all again next week. I'm just pulling out that link now altogether because for whatever reason, it didn't land. But in the chat now. So if anyone's in the chat, click on it for next week. Thank you, guys. Have a lovely evening. Have a lovely weekend. And we might see you all again next week.
That's up. See you, everyone. Thanks for your time.